Blog Talk Radio.
1, 2, 3, 4. He wants to take you high.
You're listening to the Spirit Alive Christian Podcast Network, your global transformation station. Good evening, everyone. I'm Bishop Shirleen Cook, your modern-day Shootermite woman and executive producer of the Spirit Alive Network. And I'm so blessed to welcome you to Professors with Voices for this Friday, October 22nd, 2021. And now, here's the man who is always ready to take us higher in the higher learning arena, your anointed host and facilitator, Mr. Gospel himself, my brother and my friend, Dr. Silvester Carl Henderson. Amen.
Bishop Cook, every time we talk and I hear your voice talk, I think of the Lord Jesus Christ. Because you're such a leader, an awesome pastor, an awesome professional. And I such appreciate, once again, you taking the time to allow me to engage with academics from the Academic Academy all over the world to bring to our listening audience. So once again, I want to thank you for being so kind and generous to open your station for us. Our topics that we're going to be talking about this evening is counseling, performing arts, and higher education for students of color, primarily not just black students, but students in general, underrepresented groups. And I am so excited to introduce a dear colleague of mine that I met maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. We actually, I think, met on LinkedIn, and then we established a reputation as I did a lot of work at their college, St. Mary's College, working with the Academic Center from Los Banos College. My dear friend, this afternoon that we're going to engage in a great conversation about the value of counseling, talking about the power effect for students of color and health, and how counseling builds faith for our black students and students of color in the arena, and how it offers them more opportunities for connection. My dear friend is Dr. Bedford Palmer from St. Mary's College. Dr. Palmer?
Hello.
Yeah, so I want Dr. Palmer to introduce himself to us. I know that he is a counselor and leader and tenured faculty professional leader at St. Mary's College in Moraga, California. So say hello to our listening audience.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Henderson, for bringing me here. Thank you all for having me on the show. I appreciate the honor to kind of spend time with you and to take up the time on the air. I know that that's valuable. So to give you a little bit of background on me, again, my name is Dr. Bedford Palmer. I am a counseling psychologist licensed in the state of California. I am a tenured associate professor and the chair on sabbatical of the counseling department at St. Mary's College of California. In the counseling department, what we do there is we teach master's level counselors. So that would be marriage and family therapists and professional clinical counselors, as well as school psychologists, school counselors, and career counselors, general counselors, and I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing somebody. I don't want any of my students to get mad at me. But we basically teach master's level counselors how to get out there into the world and serve their communities. In terms of just my professional life, I also have a private practice. It's known, the name of it is Deeper Than Color, and we focus on social justice and strength-based psychotherapy and consulting. We see diverse clients. We're a growing practice. Just literally hired a new person to jump on with us today, and we're out there serving the communities and doing multicultural competence work with organizations and large companies, trying to help them, treat folks a little bit better in their spaces.
Well, Dr. Palmer, it sounds like you have a lot going on, but you have a lot of knowledge, and Bishop Cook and I are so excited that you're here. Let me ask you a couple of questions. You talked about all the different branches of how you are how at St. Mary's you prepare professionals to become counselors in various arenas. What I would like us to focus on for this show is counseling in general. Give us a real definition of what is counseling, and tell us the value of counseling on student health for our students of color.
Okay. So it's a really broad question, right? Because counseling is a broad idea. It's a broad act that people can do. So if I can try to break it down a little bit, generally counseling is whenever you're talking to somebody and trying to be helpful, right? That's generally what counseling is. Now, your friend can counsel you, or your spiritual leader can counsel you, your teacher can counsel you, right? A lot of people can do counseling. Now, when the counseling that I work within, or the models that I work within, are counseling as a stand-in, specifically for the work I do, for psychotherapy, okay? So, and psychotherapy is a very specific kind of counseling that takes a very specific set of skill sets. Because unlike a general counseling where you're really kind of talking and listening, you're probably using some empathy and trying to be in someone's space in a way that's helpful and helpful. Most of the people, if you're not trained to do psychotherapy or trained to be a professional counselor, then there are a lot of techniques that you don't know, and you really don't want to go too deep with folks, because there's a danger to that. The same way as you can do first aid, right? If you have a friend who cuts their hand, you can definitely help them clean it out and put a Band-Aid on it, right? And that's doing some first aid, but you're not going to try to stitch them up unless you have specific training, right? Does that make sense?
It does. I want to expand that. So you're basically saying that anyone, in terms of generalized counseling, your pastor, your friend, your parents, or your colleagues at work can offer you advice. Counseling is about helping people, but related more to higher education for students of color and the value of it.
Right. So the thing that makes it really different when you have a licensed person or someone who's professionally trained, like a certified school counselor who has a credential and who's been trained, is that we're trained to not, first and foremost, we're not judging people, right? And so I know anyone out there who's listening, I'm sure you've had conversations with friends and family where they talk to you and they care about you, but when you're trying to tell them something, they have an idea about who and what you should be and how you should be doing it, and that can get in the way of you being able to talk about the things that you need to talk about. And you can even make it so you don't want to talk to them anymore. So like, for instance, someone's talking about a relationship, and the first thing their friend says, well, you need to break up, right? And the person might even believe that themselves,
Okay.
but they're not really trying to hear that from their friend, right? And so where professional counselors and psychologists come in is that when we work with someone, we really work hard to make sure that our only goal is to be helpful to the person to reach the goals that they want to reach. So if we're talking about students, if we're talking about people in the community, we're trying to help them figure out what they want and then help them to find the steps that they need to take to get to that goal. And that really is the base bottom of what we do. Like, we are there not to judge you, to offer you unconditional positive regard, right? And to help you get to the goal that you have instead of trying to find a goal that we have for you. And when you're able to do that, it allows people to grow in the space that they need to grow into. You know, it allows them to open themselves in ways that they're not usually able to open themselves, and it allows them to experience things that would be dangerous otherwise. You know, you can say things that you wouldn't normally say, and you're not going to get punished for that. And it's not going to come out somewhere. You know, so you tell somebody who's not held by, for instance, if you're in the school system, it's FERPA, which is a federal law that protects privacy for students. And if you're in a clinical setting, in a hospital or going to a counseling center or wherever, then you're under HIPAA, which is also a federal law that protects your health privacy. So it's not just that, like, counselors are out here and psychologists are out here saying, like, oh, you should just trust us, we're going to protect you because we're good people. No, we're going to trust you and we're going to protect your privacy because that's federal law, and we're not going to mess up our career and open ourselves to being sued so that we can go gossip, right? And I think that that's like one of the biggest differences between, someone who says they're counseling, right, and someone who's actually a licensed professional or actually certified in with a credential who's doing this kind of work.
So as you have credentials for both, we're still getting down to the heart. Every time you answered, you're getting closer to what I'm trying to still ask, and I appreciate you expanding the conversation. What does that look like? How is counseling different for urban children versus non-urban children? How would you, as a counselor in a higher education system, wanting to help, let's say, a black poor kid who just came to maybe your private business, your private counseling business for help, or an African-American young man who is starting his education at St. Mary's College. And he has some, I would say, challenges in mixing, being one of the only people of color in a classroom, or having challenges with some teachers, other teachers, math, biology, chemistry. How would you offer that person counseling different than you would for perhaps a white kid that comes in that's different? That we're trying to focus our conversations around how this counseling will help students of color, because students of color come with different perceptions and different ideas. And so tell me, what are some of the strategies that you can help our listening audience to know that some of the effective things that an effective counselor would do as they are working with children who come from a more targeted social environment?
Well, I think that there's, I struggle because I don't want to, like, undermine your premise, but I think that there's a difference that I have to talk about this differently. So I don't that you're going to do wide sweepingly different things when you're working with a student who's a black student versus a student who's a white student. Now, what you're going to do that is kind of going to address what you're talking about is that you're going to open yourself up to understanding the context that's different for that person, right? So, like, as this young person walks into the space and they want to talk about what's happening to them in class, one of the things that I would do, that I would say the real difference is in the approach that the therapist takes to therapy. So, like, when I look at therapy, I'm not looking at clients as people who I have the answer for. I look at them as people who are going to help me understand their context, and then I work within that context. And the big problem that happens for folks, specifically that happens for black and brown folks when they come into therapy, if they come across the wrong therapist, is that the therapist may have the same biases, they may have the same racism, they may have all the same stuff that this person was being affected by when they're out in that classroom. Right? And so what the real is that I'm going to basically see this person, say this young man coming into St. Mary's, for instance, and they tell me that there's racism happening to them in whatever setting, whether it's the classroom, whether it's office hours or whatever. I'm not going to pretend like that's not happening. You know, like, one of the first things that one of my mentors told me is, when you look at the history of this of black people in this country, right? At every single stage, we have encountered racism. We have encountered racism that has been in the form of slavery, in the form of physical violence, in the form of theft of our property, in the form of the pushing of ideas and ideals that hurt us, and it happens over and over again. And that's been basically the ongoing history, right? Whether you're talking about cell phones or whether you're talking about lynch mobs, it's the same racism happening. So if we have a history that's consistent moving through time, and evidence shows us that that's coming from the culture and the society that we live in, then the question you have whenever somebody is having an incident and they tell you, like, okay, there's some racism happening, is racism happening? The question has to be, why wouldn't it be? Right? So if I have a black student who's in a classroom telling me that there's some racist stuff happening, I need to ask myself, why wouldn't that be happening in a classroom? The classroom's in the U.S., isn't it? You know, the classroom's in Moraga. The classroom's in a space that's predominantly, you know, white and whatever, that's going to happen there. And so now, since we can agree that this reality is happening, now we can get to the work of how do we cope with this reality? How do we deal with it? How do we address what's happening in the room and what's happening inside your head, what's happening in your heart, in order for you to, like, navigate this in a way that feels successful to you, right? And that could be about moving classrooms. That could be about changing the behavior of the people in the classroom using regulatory systems that are in the college, like honor codes and whatnot. It could be putting your head down and getting through the next couple of weeks so you can just get this grade and get out of there. It depends on what's happening. You know, and if you're talking about something that becomes really severe, like someone's having anxiety, they can't sleep, and they're having a bunch of different kinds of symptoms that are beyond, you know, a general discomfort, then we do things to kind of work with those too. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that you have to first live in the truth and the reality that the person is bringing to you, which is what is taken away from us generally whenever we go into other systems. People don't believe us. People don't think that our experiences are true, and they make those experiences smaller than they really are.
So I guess my question would be, we're getting closer and closer, and I like the way you answered that question. We're getting closer and closer. There's a word that we use, and I can't remember the word, that talks about when someone comes to you with a reality and you try to make them think they're crazy. I can't think of the actual word where, let's say, for instance, a child comes and says, this teacher is racist, and you say, oh, no, that doesn't happen. You know, I know that person. There is a word, and I cannot remember the actual word I'm looking for, but I figured as a counselor you may be able to help me in terms of understanding, but it's basically trying to lead the person or to make the person feel like they're crazy for bringing up the truth. Because what I have found when counseling so many young musicians to get an education, you know, and I'm counseling more from a standpoint of offering mentoring support, trying to get them to stay artistic, but at the same time maintain an education so they can kind of bridge their talent with something that is more intellectual simultaneously. Many of them always talk about the fact that they feel undervalued because when they are in class and they try to speak to some of their professors about challenges that they may have about music or art or what have you, it's always as though they're coming into a classroom with a professor who already has an idea of what they are expecting, but they don't value the thoughts and ideas of the students at all. But I know there's a word for this. I cannot think of it, but it's going to come to me.
The word you're looking for, is gaslighting.
Yes. That's it. And so my point is that when you say that gaslighting would not, when you say that you kind of re-expanded my last question, my point is that how would you deal with gaslighting? Because gaslighting tends to affect more underrepresented folks than our Caucasian folk. See, one thing about me, Dr. Palmer, that you know is that I'm really direct, and I'm an old man, so I don't have anything to worry about. Those people that like me, they're gonna like me. The ones that don't, they don't, and you know what? I'm comfortable with that. But I mean, how would you deal with gaslighting from a student, primarily a male student, because I hear this all the time. where a student goes, and I remember my experiences when I was a young man in college. I remember going to a professor when I took a course on the relativity theory of Einstein. Now, I'm not going to say that the course wasn't difficult, but I had no idea what the world the course was about. And regardless of how hard I studied, I could never, during those years, you're talking about 40-some years ago, I couldn't grasp a good understanding. So I recall going to the professor's office with a series of questions to try to see if I could gain more enlightenment on what he was lecturing. I had completed all the reading, did all the assignments, but during those days, instead of the professor taking the time to try to help me bridge my areas of inquiry, the man just said, well, you're just ignorant. That, you know what, that's part of your culture. That's exactly what he said. I never will forget that. I won't say the professor's name, but I remember feeling so humiliated. It was at San Francisco State University. And I remember feeling so small. But at that time, I was kind of fearful, as many students of color are speaking up for themselves, so I just didn't say nothing. And that experience took me to a place where I made a point to myself. Whenever I became a higher academic professional, I would fight for everyone equally, but I would spend a great deal of time standing up for the rights of underserved students. And so what I'm asking you is, how would you address students, or what are some good strategies for addressing the idea of gaslighting? So can you tell our listening audience what gaslighting is, and what are some effective ways as a therapist and a counselor you can help individuals to really come to their own and value their own ideas?
So I would say, so I want to go back, and I think, like, I always want to make sure that when we're talking about our folks, because there's a thin line when we say, like, for instance, our folks experience gaslighting more. I think people experience gaslighting, the kind that we get from schools and from organizations and whatnot that's anti-black, is an anti-black or a racist kind of gaslighting, right? And so when I think there's a lot of ways that people talk about this stuff. I mean, it can happen in microaggressions, which are like these racist assaults that feel really bad, but they're unclear whether they're on purpose. And that can be some of the things that happened. In the case that you're talking about, like being in a classroom and or going to office hours and the professor basically telling you that, you know, there's some sort of deficit with you and your people don't know how to do stuff and things like that. I mean, that's just straight up racism. And to be honest, I mean, you're talking about doing it 40 years ago. I have the same story with a stats professor 20 years ago when I was in my master's program at Long Beach State, who basically I went to ask for help and had questions and was told that apparently I should probably go into another discipline. Psychology wasn't a good discipline for me because I couldn't understand the basic things she was saying. Now, that's not, apparently that's what she believed, and my grades didn't agree with her, and my grades in the more advanced statistics class didn't agree with her, and my doctorate doesn't agree with her. But that's what she said, and that's something that's allowed to be said to students and to people of color, to black folks in general, when we ask for help, is for us to be told that we're denied that. And so one of the things that I do with students when I'm talking to them, and when I'm talking to not just students, I talk to folks, you know, across the board with this, not to say that we can't focus there, but like one of the things that we are taught not to do is to feel entitled to things that we should be entitled to, right? And so I talk to young folks about this all the time in terms of like the idea of, you know, there's certain things that you're entitled to, certain things you're not. As a professor, you can come into my classroom and you tell me you're entitled to an A, we're going to have a conversation about why that's not true, right? You get an A because of the work that you do and all the other stuff that goes around that. What you are entitled to is my time. You are entitled to my support. You are entitled to fairness. You are entitled to all the things that you came into the space and we promised you when you signed on the line and said you want to come to our school, right? And so one of the things that we have to do with our young folks is help them to differentiate between what they're entitled to, right, and then the things that they would not feel that way towards. And the big difference is that a lot of, white students, non-black students, they walk into spaces and they believe they're entitled to all this stuff, right? So they don't have that problem. Like when you're talking about white students, they come in, they think that they are owed all of these things. And this is not all white people, but I'm just saying, like, this generally, if we talk about, for instance, Ta-Nehisi Coates and the way that he talks about white folks are being raised to be free, right? We aren't as much. We're usually told to be humble. We're usually told that we have to do it on our own, and generally that's just not true. In this society, people with privilege ask for help more than people who don't have privilege, and that's a problem. And so within a counseling context, I tend to be asking, like, what support are you asking for when you're in these spaces, and how are they responding to you? And then I try to help them game plan on how to get that support that they're owed. And if the professor or the manager or whoever doesn't want to give them what they're owed, then we figure out ways to go around that. So, going back to your earlier question in terms of like what's really a different thing for black kids, for black people, I think we spend a lot of time trying to understand how to work the system so that the system doesn't harm us, and that's a different thing than folks where the system is built to help them, and I think that we have to spend time on that. Now, in terms of like, because I do want to answer your direct question of what is gaslighting. So here's what gaslighting is. Gaslighting specifically is when, and you described it well, it's when you try to shift another person's reality with the hopes that in shifting that reality, it will give you some sort of control over that person.
Exactly.
That's the basis of it. So you tell someone, a classic idea of it is, the whole idea of gaslighting comes from this idea that this abusive man was with his wife or his partner, and he would turn the gas light down, and she would say the gas was turned down, and she tried to turn it back up to the light, and he's like, the gas, it's not dark. What's wrong with you? Why do you keep messing with the gas? Even though he's intentionally turning it down. And then like it gets worse when you they start blaming the person. So they're saying, well, why can't you keep the light on? Every time I leave the room, the light goes down. I don't understand why you can't keep the light on when in fact you're the one turning it down. Does that make sense?
It does.
I
understand it very well, and I understand it. I understand it in a layperson's way, because I have a tendency to take ideas and place them in my simplified language approach. That's just been a reality I've used my whole life. I see that happen not just to students. I see that happen even from a standpoint of when you go to talk to some non-professors or professors who are not sensitive to students of color, and they're trying to offer advice. They think what you're saying when a student comes to complain is that you want to lower your standards. No. A lot of times what it means is that you want to be culturally responsible and responsive to the needs of the student. Sometimes it is simply finding different approaches to answering a question, understanding where the student comes from socially, and helping the students to understand questions that they may ask. To me, my point is that if a counselor or a teacher has to get on top of a car and scream and yell in order to get a student to understand, then do it. But a lot of times professors think well, I only have one way that I can communicate. When I was in grad school, when I was in graduate school, there's something called the 12-tone row. Now, the 12-tone row is a classical is a compositional technique where a classical composer would have 12 notes in one area, going one direction, and then they use what they call retrograde. That means going backwards, playing 12 notes backwards. And then you take that and invert it. You may start halfway in the phrase and have inversion going. You have the inversion part of the 12 notes, and then you have retrograde inversion. Where to me it's simple. If you're talking to some inner city kids that don't understand it, you just say, you take 12 numbers, place them front, then turn them backwards, and then start in the middle, go front, and go back. It's the same thing. It's breaking it down so that they understand what you're saying, because you made the real great definition that counseling is about help. So I know I'm focused a lot on performing arts and helping my students to graduate and deal with the complications around the system trying to devalue the value of performing arts. You're coming from a more clinical and methodical approach that is really talking about the deep-rooted issues that are found in counseling, but the benefits that you have from having a licensed person, because what a licensed person is doing is not trying to give you the answers. They're trying to guide you through a process.
Right.
Is that pretty accurate?
I think it is. One of the things I really want to make sure that we touch on, too, is just the idea that, because I know that there's stigma, and some of the people listening right now, they're thinking, like, I don't want to go to counseling because of whatever reason. One of the things, the refrains that I'll get, and I want to speak directly to the community that's listening. I know that this is a faith-based community, so a lot of faith-based people see that they feel like there's counseling somehow is either at odds or in competition with, their spiritual practice or potentially their spiritual leaders. And I would like to just put out there that it's not. I happily work with spiritual leaders who want to get involved. One of the things when I first got trained, we go into the multicultural course. We had an interfaith leader come in and talk to us about how we could do that, how we could respect people and make sure that we were in a space that was respectful and bringing people in. And what I want folks to understand is, like, for instance, at St. Mary's, and this is not just St. Mary's. St. Mary's is a Catholic college, Lasallian Catholic liberal arts college, but it's not because of that Catholicism or the religious part of the college that we do this. It's because of the discipline of counseling and the discipline of psychology. When we're talking about being multiculturally competent or culturally humble, religion is part of it. Spiritualism is part of it. Because you have to, I know you understand this, but when I'm talking to students, so if you hear me kind of go into my professor role, what I tell them is, like, you have to understand that 80% plus of the people, of the 8 billion people that's on the planet, believe in a higher being. So you can't walk around here pretending like secularism is the only way that you can approach stuff when the majority of folks don't believe that, and you're out here to serve community. So when we work with folks, the idea is to bring, like when I see, for instance, I see a Christian client, and it's the same whether I see a Christian client or whether I see a Hindu client, a Muslim client, a Jewish client, a client who is a devotee of Ife. It all, because remember, it's not about my spiritual beliefs, right? It's about the spiritual beliefs of the people coming in. And I want to know about how you see the world and how that connects to the way that you're going to find healing. So, like, when someone tells me, I would hear this a lot when I was, first going through, it's like, well, I don't need therapy, I need Jesus. And I was like, well, I think Jesus provided me for you to get through this. So why don't you tell me what those teachings are, and let's see if we are in line, And so that's kind of something that I think it's really important for people to understand. And when we are working with, because you were talking about earlier, you mentioned like the spiritual growth of people. If spiritual growth is your priority, if spiritual growth is something that's important to you, and you come in and you see a counselor, a good counselor, and I think that's something that we also always need to put in there, right? A good therapist, a good psychologist, a good counselor, because there are bad counselors and unethical counselors and stuff like that, and we can get into that. But if you're seeing someone who's really got your well-being in mind, then you bring your spiritual system and you bring your spiritual family and community into the space, and we're going to treat that with respect, and we're going to help you see through a lens that is clearer, because a lot of times what ends up happening is people will take, for instance, the idea of if I'm just going to get deep into it, so I'm going to give you a little window into how I work with, for instance, a Christian person, if that's okay. Someone will take the idea that they have a relationship with God, and they'll turn that into a problematic belief that they can only get help from some sort of like a spiritual awakening that they would have internally and completely independent of the people around them, right? And so if you come at it from a perspective of having some sort of understanding of like the way that people are relating from a Protestant perspective with God, then you understand that God is going to like speak through all kinds of different lenses and all kinds of different voices and all kinds of different people in the community. So if you think that you're only going to be able to get through whatever's hurting you by God directly talking to you, then I'm going to say, well, how are you ignoring the people in your community who's coming to your door and trying to help you? How are you going to not deal with like your family who's calling you trying to get you through this day? Like God doesn't talk to you in that way because that's not what it says in the Bible. That's not what you're learning in church, but you've taken it and turned it in a different way. So let's look at it differently. You see what I'm saying there? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And you know what? I think that is a good way that we can continue the conversation around some effective ways in which we can understand that counseling helps individuals also to feel connected. So the reality is just that it's all about being ethical regardless of whether you're talking to a faith-based person, whether you're talking to a non-faith-based person, and that you brought something up that traditionally people of color don't believe in counseling. But you know what? I want to expand that because you would know more because you've done more research, but I'm talking as a lay professional. I'm not sure that it's that people of color don't believe in counseling from my perspective, but their counselors have been their clergy. And so I'm not sure that it's that they don't believe in, they may not believe in licensed counseling, but they kind of believe in spiritual life coaching. I'm going to ask Bishop Cook to kind of jump in there because a lot of faith-based folks believe in conversations and getting help, but they want it from a person who is anointed with their belief in God. Is that accurate, Bishop Cook?
That's accurate. That is an accurate perception, but it's not the correct one. First of all, what I try to teach, what I'm trying to teach the faith-based community and servant leaders alike is we're called to preach the gospel, to equip the body. So I tell people, ministry is not just in the church. So those counselors, they too are ministers. They are put in a position to be used by God to help enlighten us, to direct us, to help us work through issues. So I'm telling people, I know we have been told to, as we as a community have been told, don't go out there telling our business, but I'm telling you, I'm telling the truth. That is what we've been taught. But I am telling us as a leader that trains other leaders, that, we need to learn how to stay in our lane. And we should not be afraid to tell people, you know what? You need some professional help. Because what happens is pastors get so bogged down in trying to counsel people in their issues that they don't really serve. They can't do what God called them to do. We are called to train people how to use the Word of God and other people to help us to live an abundant life now. So I suggest people go to counselors, but when they do go to counselors, I suggest that they find the right one. So to you, Dr. Palmer, the question I want you to address is, when these young people do go to counselors, and see, for me, gaslighting, I'm simpler than you, Dr. Henderson. Gaslighting is simply emotional abuse to me. Anytime I have a situation happen to me, and you demean that, and you trivialize that, and you dismiss that. That's emotional abuse.
Absolutely.
So when you go into that counselor, I want to know, how are you going to counteract that pattern of emotional abuse that these young people could have been going through from the time they entered the educational system? You know?
Well, I think that it's and I really appreciate the way that you put that. That's literally the way that I explain the difference between like a spiritual counseling and like and clinical counseling. I try to tell folks it's about the goal, and you got to understand that your spiritual leader, like your pastor, they are trying to help your soul, right? And your soul is more important than anything else. Which means that if you're going to them to talk about some earthly stuff, they might not have some earthly counseling for you in this moment, and that's okay. That's you can use the what you get from your pastor, and you can use what you get from your therapist, and you make decisions because you got free will.
That's right.
And so what in terms of like what we do to counteract the abuse that people have. I mean, and there's a lot of technical ways to put this, but one of the simplest things, and one of the things that I find really effective is calling it out. Like I was saying earlier, like when I used to work at UC Davis, and UC Davis is it's a research one institution. That means, for the folks who don't know, they're very much about the science and the engineering, and they want to get, if you're a professor there, you're putting out research, and you really worry more about research than you do your students, and your students can get, you get prestige, and you move forward by involving yourself in that research. But what that means is that there's a lot of science-focused individuals there, and science-focused programs are put as the most important thing, whether you're talking about engineering, or at Davis it was veterinary services, so instead of like medical school, people were learning to be vets, but it's the same kind of mentality of just really high rigor. But also in there's this thing about whether certain people are able to achieve versus other people. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what I learned working with my engineering students and my STEM students and all the different folks who are in these like high stress, high stakes majors, was that if I was able to call out the reality of the abuse and the racism or the sexism for the women who were in there and whatnot, like that would open a person up in a way so that they already understood, right, that I wasn't one of these people who was going to gaslight them and continue that abuse. So what I would normally do is I would say something to the extent of, I see that you're a black woman in this engineering program. I know it must be hard. I know you're having a hard time with some of these people, right? And that would open it up, and we would start to, we dig deeper and talk more. And here's the thing, again, if we talk about what a good therapist is going to do, what a good counselor is going to do, they're going to get to know the population and the situations that people are in.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that if you're a woman, or if you're a black person in an engineering program, in a STEM science program, if you're in anything that one, there's not a lot of us represented in, and two, there's this concept of who's smart and who's not, like basically what Dr. Henderson was talking about in terms of learning, like, physics and whatnot. There's going to be this bias that you're not going to be successful, and it's going to trickle down from the professors through the students. So folks who are in these programs, they don't just have a hard time getting through the tests or getting through the papers or whatever. They have a hard time finding groups to work with, because the racism or the sexism in the space is going to keep people will literally shun them and not allow them to be parts of their groups. And then when they're not able to work in these groups, they're not able to work at the same level because everybody else is getting help from each other. And when they go to the professor, who's also believing some of these really nasty stereotypes about what blackness is or what a woman is, they look at them and they gaslight and they put that back onto the student saying, well, why aren't you able to find a group? All these groups are around. Why can't you figure it out? And they never go to the next step of saying, well, how am I building a system right now that makes it easy to discriminate against certain students, right? And so being able to talk to my clients within the context of what they're of the work that they're doing, and being able to say, like, I know that these groups will be hard. I know that this is probably happening. So, like, why don't we talk about that and get that out of the way? You don't have to spend, 2 sessions just trying to figure out if I'm going to believe you that you're experiencing racism, right? And that helps us to align and become connected, and that is at the crux of any counselor or psychotherapy experience is the rapport that we build. Because, again, we're strangers. You don't know us, and we don't have this, like, large connection to you, so we have to build that. But once we build that, that's when all the good work can happen, because now you get to simulate, and I really use that word specifically. We simulate a relationship that is closer than it could be, right? Because you don't know me, you don't know my life, right? As a counselor, all you see is when I, for me right now, turn on my screen and we get onto Zoom and we talk for a second. But I'm going to get to know you. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to pay attention to you. I'm going to put you as the center of everything for this moment, and we're going to figure out what's going on. And if you can be as honest as possible with me, that means you're also being honest with yourself. And that's the crux of what therapy is being able to get to a space where you eventually say and think the things that you've been keeping yourself from saying and thinking. And in doing so, you allow yourself to see the options that were already in front of you, right? Because that's the problem. That's the thing that people don't have. It's not that we're given some sort of special. There's no magic to it. It's just the fact that if you're with a human being who gives you space to breathe, then you will figure it out yourself most of the time. And if you can't figure it out, we'll give you a bunch of little toolkits to help you figure it out. But we're not going to tell you. I'd never tell a person to drop out of an engineering program or to stay in an engineering program, right? But I'm going to help you to figure out what you want, because you may want to be in this. I'm going to be the next, Michael Eric Dyson. I want to be out there, or, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Or it's like, this engineering thing, my parents or somebody else told me I wanted to do this, but I don't really like it. I don't even really like math. I might want to go do music, I like the math when it comes to rhythm and stuff like that, but I don't like this whole thing about trying to build an engine. I ain't trying to do that. So that's kind of that's the space that we live in when we're talking about doing this kind of work with students who are in the classroom and whatnot.
Well, Dr. Palmer, I want to add to what you just said there, because what you're basically doing is helping people from a counseling perspective, and Bishop Cook brought it home as well in terms of how we can help not just young people, but people in general from a counseling perspective about releasing their trauma. Because sometimes the trauma that's inside of all of us is what create these neurotic behaviors. And so, however, in order to release, I remember something I read that talked about, I think it's from the American Psychological Association, that concluded that, recognizing the connection between spirituality and trauma is essential to a full understanding of human behavior.
Yes.
Because there is, it's kind of similar. I was part of this when I worked for the Academic Center for California Community Colleges. I was assigned to them for 3 years, working at the state level for all the California community colleges. I worked a lot with prison education, and I met this real, very unique professional that from New York. He was a world-acclaimed research scholar, and he always talked about trauma is drama, or drama is trauma, and how he worked primarily with prisoners. And he was talking about it's kind of unhealthy the way in which you have prisoners locked up, and then if they've been locked up 20 years and they've had all this trauma, all they know is that their trauma still leads to drama. So you let them out and you expect them to become these very well-established citizens in the country and society, and that just doesn't happen.
That's not going to work.
Because they've been locked up and with drama as a result of
on
their
top
own
of their trauma. On top of their trauma.
That's right.
You know?
And so you know what I mean? It's kind of crazy to assume that when a child comes in and asks for help, that you don't recognize or get some sort of idea of the space they come from. So one of the great things that everyone is talking about, and you're bringing it home, Dr. Palmer and Bishop Cook, is really the opportunity for connecting with individuals, which is helping. The opportunity for connecting, whether it is through the university, whether it is through programs such that you run at St. Mary's, whether it's from programs that you run from your own private practice, whether it's through the faith-based community. The point is for the person that you're speaking with is to have real good intentions for you and really want the best, because you hear these horror stories where people go to therapists and counselors and they come out worse.
Yes. So that leads to the next thing, Dr. Palmer. How active are universities trying to recruit people of color to become counselors? Because that's very important. You know, that also goes a long way with the student when they walk in and they see somebody that looks like them, and they might, I think they have a chance to be understood, to be heard. Mm-hmm. So are they actively, or, you know, are universities actively trying to recruit more people of color, or do we have to go about it the old-fashioned way, kicking the doors in?
Well, I think we always got to kick some doors in.
Okay.
I honestly, no, I mean, you know, on my email, if you ever get emails from me, you ever saw my email responses, the quote that I have first in my email quotes are, Frederick Douglass says, "Power never sees anything without demand, never has, never will." And I strongly believe that, and I try to help folks understand that. Now, it depends on the college. You know, some colleges very much value the importance of diversity and inclusion and belonging and equity, and they bring people in across the board trying to kind of build those kind of communities. When I was at UC Davis, we had a really strong program of social justice and multiculturalism in our counseling center at the time. I've also been places where that's not as big of a value. And what I would say is, for folks who are, for instance, thinking about going to, you know, they're going to go to college, that's a question you want to ask and you want to see. Like, go and look at the colleges that you're looking at and see what their counseling center looks like. It's actually a pretty good indicator. If the counseling center is all white, you know, that should tell you something, because it's not hard. We out here. Like, you know, people love to believe that it's hard to hire, you know, black and brown people all over the place looking for jobs. You know what I mean? And so it's you know, if you go into a space and it's all white, it's because the people wanted it to be all white, and that's just the truth, you know. And so, again, kind of speaking to the reality of our world, and not allowing the world to gaslight us, not allowing the world to like tell us what our reality is. When you see a situation and it looks a certain way, they need to explain why it's not. You know what I'm saying? So, like, when you walk into a college, when you walk into a workspace, when you walk into a church, let's keep it real. You walk into a church and it all looks one way, then that community decided it was all going to look that way. With the exception, and I will give a primary exception to generally black churches and black communities and black whatever. Like, we don't, in my experience, we don't do it that way. We pretty much open to everyone, but the problem is that people don't really want to hang with us. And so that's usually why we end up being separate, you know, because we take people. You know, that's a fundamental cultural trait of that I believe that black people in America specifically do. We will adopt you. You know, if you want to be with us, we will be with you. And maybe that's a social location type of thing, but it's just the truth. But if you walk into a space, a space of healing, and all the healers look exactly the same, then they're trying to heal those type of people. And that's just the reality of it. Now, I think, no, I mean, I was going to try to soften it, but I'm not going to soften it. It's just, that's
no.
true.
Come on with it.
No, don't soften it, Dr. Palmer. Just tell the truth, because the point is that that's one of the beautiful things about Bishop Cook's network. It reaches a lot of people, and sometimes in order for people to hear the truth, they have to be uncomfortable. Well, I know I do. And so we all do.
Amen.
And so this is an opportunity that we're speaking in an intelligent manner, a respectful manner, but telling the truth. You know, sometimes, you know, call a spade a spade.
That's
so
right.
it's
No
kind of
pun
like what I'm
intended.
hearing is that we have to build, we have to start with the idea that effective counseling helps.
Yes.
Now, the way in which you sort of go about the help or obtaining help is different, but it helps. But for students of color, and I want to expand the conversation for employees of color. I know I've had mega challenges as a professor. I've had a lot of success, but I've had a lot of backdoor challenges from working from all-white systems that don't understand the way. And they try to emotionalize your emotion to make it think that you're crazy. No, you're not crazy. It's just that whenever you ask a question and you bring something out that's honest, people try to adjust it. And what they do, because the majority of the institution is all Caucasian, they go around and they go around and they get more supporters. They get more supporters to support their ideas, but in reality, it's still wrong. They do. When I see this happen all the time, where an African-American woman or male will go in and talk about feeling undervalued, and what happened, the white administrators will try to make it seem like, oh, they're a troublemaker. And it was simply they wanted a conversation. And instead of them really listening to the person and trying to empathize or at least sympathize on some level, what they do is they communicate that message to everyone else in the system to try to alienate the person. So the issues around having not effective support or gaslighting is just not within the classroom, is in the workspace at the same time.
Yes.
Well, yeah, it's. I mean, I think that it's systematic. I think one of the things that we have to just say and keep saying to everyone around us so they can hear it is that system is all encompassing, right? It's whether if a child is in preschool, they're dealing with that system. If the baby in the womb who's being born in these systems, whose mom, if she's black, is likely to be 4 times more likely to die in childbirth, is dealing with that. You know what I mean? Like, the president, the former president of the United States, going up in front of Congress is being called a liar on national television, is dealing with that. I mean, it's across the board that we're dealing with these systems of oppression. And I think that what we have to do is we have to challenge these ideas of what is true. And the way you do that, I mean, honestly, when we're talking about in employment situations, right? And it's funny because this has become my wheelhouse. I feel like my, I worked at Davis for a while, and then I went into private practice. And in the interim, I worked with a lot of employee assistance kind of programs, and a lot of the students who were going through, or the type of students who were going through that process at Davis and at Berkeley and different places that I worked, those students are now the employees that I'm working with in the employee assistance programs. And so I feel like I have to track them. But, like, they go into these systems, and these systems tend to push out whatever value is the value of how, let's just say, saturated the system is in whiteness, right? And so if you can, I think that what we have to do with folks is, and this is something that when you're doing more community-based counseling and you're doing more community-based psychology stuff, you think about systems that are larger than the individual and even that individual's personal system, but you think of the larger system. One of the ways that, for instance, you're going to make a workplace more healthy is by getting a critical mass of people who are people of color in that space, so that when the gaslighting happens, there's another person there to say, stop it. You know, and I mean, the power of having a partner, to stop the stuff that's happening, it's amazing what it can do. You know, when you're sitting there, you're in this meeting, you're sitting around this table, and someone is saying something that's absolutely off the wall. It doesn't make any sense. They're bringing in all this stuff. They're crying at you. They're doing all this nastiness. And then they look at you and try to make you believe that gas light is turned down, and they didn't do it. And then someone says, wait. Yeah, you did do that. You know? And just that little bit of someone saying the reality is the reality, it frees the space up and allows for actual change to occur. And so I think that, you know, when we talk about, sometimes people kind of, they undervalue movements around diversity. And I think that that's not the best move to do. You need to have a whole lot of different people with a whole lot of different kind of ideas, and you got to address the reality in the room that, like, a lot of the stuff that's going on, it's not just generally intolerance. There's a huge amount of anti-blackness that's specifically anti-black that is happening in all of these spaces, and a lot of people are feeling the splash of the anti-blackness going towards them. You know what I mean? Because in our country, in this particular context, not the whole world, not everything in the universe, but in the United States of America, with a system of chattel slavery that built all of the economic processes that hold this country aloft in the world, based on the destroyed families, destroyed identities, destroyed minds and bodies of black people. Well, race is a fundamental problem, like in terms of anti-blackness and racism, right? And if we understand that, if we can get our heads around this is the issue, then it opens us up to make the actual changes that are necessary to help people live more healthy lives. I think that we have to. It all kind of comes down to acknowledging it, but the skill is how do you do that? Because like Dr. Henderson was saying, if you do that in the wrong environment and you don't read the environment, you telling the truth will get you fired. Right? And so how do we figure out how to build a garden so that we bring enough people through, which I know that's something that you're doing all the time in the community colleges. I know you're building pipelines. That's how we got to know each other, right? You came in, you're building a pipeline in St. Mary's. If we build these pipelines of professionals and we build these pipelines that start in early childhood education that get them out there and into these spaces where folks can become decision makers, where folks can be able to have some sort of agency in what they do, overall, everyone gets better. And this, I'll say this one last thing before taking a pause. This helps white people too, because white supremacy and anti-black racism and all the gaslighting that goes into it, it hurts white people. You know, it's not a good thing. It messes with their spirit. It messes with their soul. It messes with their longevity. You know, it is stressful to be an oppressor. If there was one thing I wish I could just help teach some cats, it's like, yo, your life will be so much easier. Like when I'm talking about men, for instance, in misogyny, as a man who's trying really hard to be less misogynistic and less sexist, every time I'm able to like strip away some of that, my life gets easier. Like literally, this is a silly thing. I am currently wearing a purple pinkish kind of shirt, right? That 10 years ago I would have been worried about because of like heterosexism and sexism. But I like the shirt and it looks good on my skin, so why am I worried about that? My life is happier because I'm less bigoted, you know what I'm saying? And that's something that people need to understand, you know?
Right.
That's right. Yep. You know what, Dr. Palmer, Bishop Cook, this has been an invigorating conversation. You said something, and, you know, I'm always looking for phrases. We talked about us creating a support agency of love and inclusion for individuals, which sort of signifies health. We know that Bishop Cook does it from a faith-based perspective. Dr. Palmer, you're doing it for not only at St. Mary's College, but from a research base, from a therapist base, from a psychologist base, and I certainly am very actively involved in helping people, primarily, especially men of color and performing artists. I have a national reputation for going out of my way to help African-American males, and as well as I have a great love for the performing arts. I think that one of the things that have come out of this is the fact that, first of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Palmer, for taking the time to bring your expertise to this wonderful show and this wonderful network that my dear friend Bishop Shirleen Cook allows me to bring intellectual academics from all over the world. We've had people from all over the world, many Ivy League universities from all over the nation. We've been doing this about 10 years now on this show. And so I, first of all, want to thank you for bringing your skill and your skill base to the Spirit Alive Network. I want to thank Bishop Cook, and I know one of the practices that Bishop Cook has is to take 10, 15 minutes or whatever time is available for our listening audience. So I would like to ask Bishop Cook if she wants to log on to see if there's anyone that want to say anything. Very often, just to kind of see if there's any listeners who want to add a thought or a question.
Okay, thank you. All right, my brothers and sisters, you know how this works. If you are in the studio, if you would kindly press your 1, I will address you by your area code and the last 4 digits of your phone number, and that will signify that you are live in the studio. If you are in either of our 3 chat rooms, if you have a comment or a question that you would like to be relayed to Dr. Palmer or to Dr. Henderson, if you type it now, I would be happy to relay that to you. Now, as I wait for to see if we have any responses. To you, Dr. Palmer, I too would just like to thank you, and I just want you to know that I am, like I said, I am a servant leader, that I believe in counselors, I believe in counseling, but I believe in the right counselors, counseling for the right reasons. So, and I also want everyone to know that it is a partnership. So to other servant leaders, look, encourage people if they are young people, if they need to go to their counselors in their school, encourage them to go. If you have people in your congregation that you might think that you might feel, or the Lord has even shown you that might benefit from professional counseling, send them, suggest it. That doesn't take anything away from you. We are spiritual counselors. We are concerned about their souls. And if I'm concerned about their soul, then I need their minds to be right. And if their minds are going to be right, I'm going to send them to somebody that has studied these phenomena so that they can help give them the tools that will help them to truly overcome their issues and live an abundant life in Christ. This is not a competition. This is a partnership. This is a pipeline of love. So servant leaders, please, don't be afraid to suggest or have resources for mental health workers, for counselors, for psychologists, for psychiatrists, because we need to be healthy physically, spiritually, emotionally, healthy in order to live the abundant life. Dr. Henderson, I don't see any ones. We do have some comments in the chat room. We have a Beverly, and she is calling in from, she's calling all the way in from Jamaica. She's typing in from Jamaica. And she says this was a very interesting conversation. And she says she sees that some of the same problems are happening all over the world. Well, yes, racism does happen all over the world, yes. But she wants to thank both of you. She's a student in Jamaica, and she wants to thank both of you for this conversation. She said she did not believe these conversations were had. So, gentlemen, thank you. Dr.
Well,
Henderson,
you know
what?
There are some real challenges. One of the things I learned, and can take a minute or so to add Dr. Palmer if he has any idea on this, is that I've done a lot of studying, about the way higher education is formed in the U.S. as opposed to the way it's formed in other countries.
Uh-huh.
And in America, people have the opportunity to speak up way more than in other countries.
Yes.
And so you're talking about gaslighting. You're talking about straight up not just racism, but depriving people of their human rights. Americans are way more free in terms of their choices, especially from a vocal liberty standpoint, than other folks. In America, you would not see in places like China or Japan students parading around against their leader from the country.
That's right.
There's many more challenges that come from a legal standpoint when you go against authority, when you go against those high-ranking professionals, of which tenured professors are one of those high-ranking professionals in other countries. Dr. Palmer, can you share something about that, or about how?
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, one, I'm not I don't necessarily, I'm not an authority on like how other systems in terms of their academia works. I do want to kind of point out, and I feel like I have to say this, I think that students go out and regardless of the state, they try to get their point across. Just thinking about in China and Thailand and different other places, like folks will, if they feel like the government isn't doing what they need to do, those are students usually who are out in the street getting beat up on and throwing bricks and doing the things they need to do, just like they do in the U.S. I think that in the U.S. we have a particular system with particular values for how we conduct discourse, which is different culturally from different spaces. So, for instance, we're very individualistic in the U.S. Like that's like one of the Western kind of ways of approaching, which is different than a lot of other spaces. So, like some of the ways that we would speak out would not be welcome in a space that's more communal because it's not helping the group, right? So and you know that as a professor, that sometimes people say stuff in class and it ain't helping the group. It's just pushing, And so I'm just very careful to like make those kinds of comparisons because I think that there's a lot of problems with our system, in terms of access, in terms of being able to pay for it, in terms of the debt that comes, in terms of the retention. So we get people, but then the people end up dropping out because they're mistreated. So yeah, that would be like my piece on it. But I think it's a complicated subject.
Well, I have a lot of colleagues over in Great Britain, especially over in Great Britain and in Africa. Quite a few other intellectual academics, professors that I know, and I have great relationships with them, and students as well that go that study abroad, and some professionals that teach. And I was intrigued about some 15 years ago and spent a lot of time reading on just some of the differences about how a 4-year degree for us is a 3-year degree for them. But I find that just as the student from Jamaica that Bishop Cook mentioned, that people in problems are people in problems. They're the same problems under a different roof. It's the same problem. You have gaslighting in America. You have gaslighting in other countries. And I want to make it clear when we talk about underrepresented groups, it is true that African Americans have been treated poorly and still tend to be treated poorly from so many different levels of professional life, not only from the student perspective, from the social perspective. Even Bishop Cook can talk about women in ministry, about how women are treated sometimes in ministry different than men are in ministry, and how it's kind of like, well, God didn't want a woman to preach. A woman doesn't have anything to say. That's crazy, But Bishop Cook can address that big time. I think the reality is that in all of this, what we're learning is that one of the divine, God's plan, as God wants us to share love with everybody, love takes on a different form based on who it's coming from. So the academic academy, the institution, can display love through offering responsive curriculum. By professors can share love by understanding how to use words and phrases that would meet across diversity of students within the classroom, finding different ways to talk about physics or chemistry or geometry, not only from one language lens, but from a lens that ingratiates and is inclusive of different social norms from all over the world. And so from that standpoint, if we do these things, all of us can maybe not join the licensed form of being a counselor or a therapist, but we can all demonstrate love.
Yes.
And that's one thing for truth. So, Bishop Cook, what I'm going to do is, since we don't have anyone, because sometimes what happens, we don't have people that'll call in, they'll respond, but they may be a bit apprehensive because they don't know the actual question to ask. And but the show is so documented. Dr. Palmer, we're going to ask that you would give us some of your closing words. And as you're giving us your closing words, if you can just give us 3 points that you would like to leave with our listening audience about the value of counseling and being a licensed therapist. Just 3 points, and expand on those.
3 points. So I think that I would say the first point is people are social. Regardless of how you socialize, you're going to socialize. Whether you're introvert, extrovert, whatever, you end up interacting with other people. So we do that through organizations, we do that through spiritual groups, we do that through friend groups and families. What that tells me is that we don't do stuff by ourselves. We don't go through pain by ourselves. We don't go through happiness by ourselves, and we don't grow by ourselves. And to think that you should forego counseling and therapy because you can do it by yourself is to go be at odds with your basic, most fundamental humanity. Now, I'm not saying you have to go to counseling to get the help, but you need to be getting help from someplace. And if it is something that's if it's within the realm of counseling, so if you're dealing with sadness or anger, or you're dealing with feeling anxious, or you're feeling like you're worried about whether you're going to take your own life or something like that, that's my house. That's our house. We're good at what we do. We will help you. You know what I'm saying? You do need to find the right therapist. But there are a lot of us out here, and we will show up. So the first piece is that you don't have to do this stuff by yourself. Second piece is, and I think this is important, you said this earlier about the whole, we don't talk about our business in the streets. The reason that we have that value as black people in America, that is not something that came from our African roots. Because if you talk about our African roots, we're talking about communal societies where everybody knows what everybody's doing.
That's right.
The reason why we hold that here, that is a fundamental aspect of slavery. When we were enslaved, we were abused, and we were told not to talk about it. And that somehow has pushed itself into our current reality. And I if I can fall into the rhetoric of the church, I rebuke that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you should not be thinking.
Oh, I like that. That's right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, secrets are not good. Secrets about your pain are never good. And anyone telling you that you need to suffer in silence, they are not your friend, and they are not speaking to you from a space that's positive in any way whatsoever. And I'll hold that. So you don't need to keep these secrets. If someone's abusing you, hurting you, talking bad to you, gaslighting you, acting a fool with you, whatever it is, if you come from a family where bad stuff was happening, you holding that by yourself, the only thing you're going to be able to do by holding that to yourself is to hold it until you can give it and put it on to someone else in the way that it was put on to you. So you come to counseling so that we can undo some of these systems, so you can relearn how to interact with people in a way that means that the abuse that you got isn't going to go to your kids, it's not going to go to your family, it's not going to go to your partner, it's not going to keep you from living a life where people will love you and be happy with you because you're doing the stuff that makes you not like and be distant from and potentially hate other people. And that goes for racial trauma and all the stuff too, right? So you can't do it alone. don't keep secrets. And I guess the last one is don't, and this isn't from me, this is something that Dr. Thomas Parham is the first person I ever heard say this. And I know it's in other spaces too. It comes from other authors. But, like, don't allow other people, specifically don't allow whiteness to define your reality.
That's right.
Your reality has to be based. You have to look at your reality, and you need to be questioning everything in front of you, and not in some, like, you know, I'm going to get into conspiracy theories and I don't need to be vaccinated and all this other. Like, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about on a day-to-day, what are these people around you doing and telling you that is either helpful to you or harmful to you? You know, if you're in the classroom and all you want is help and all you're getting is disrespect and rudeness, right? If you walk into office hours and you're expecting to get help and you get kicked out of office hours for asking for help, the problem's not with you, you know? And allowing yourself to understand that the problem is not with you is powerful. And conversely, when you walk into a space, if you go to college, you get in a job somewhere, you walk in the door of any space, there's a fundamental reality about human beings, besides the other piece about us being that we're social, is that we're pretty selfish. And I say that not with any kind of, like, I'm not trying to throw shade, as people might say, or they might have said 10 years ago. We're pretty selfish. We don't tend to do things, especially as groups, for no reason. And so if you get into a college, it's because the college thought it could benefit from having you there, both through your tuition and through your presence, right? That's why they ask all those extra questions. Same difference with work. If you go into a workspace, they believe that they're benefiting from your work there. So when you walk into these spaces and you see yourself in these spaces, you got to understand that your very presence means you deserve it, and that you belong there, and that you should make someone fight to push you out of it. And so so the third piece is about not allowing other people to define your reality for good or for ill. You need to look in, be critical of what's happening, and understand that there's truth in the world that you can accept, even if people are telling you that they're not true.
Well, Dr. Palmer, you have added a wonderful way by which I'm going to give my closing remarks, and thank you once again for being here. You tell the president or whoever confirmed your hire at St. Mary's College that we love them for supporting such an outstanding professional such as yourself.
Yes, amen.
You're just
amen.
a delight of academic intellectual and a professional, and I such appreciate you sharing your wonderful talent. I am going to take a couple of more seconds to just talk about my great respect and admiration for Bishop Cook. Bishop Cook is such an awesome professional and wonderful woman of God, and she's highly educated. She's very well read. She speaks various languages, and she writes plays, and, you know, she worked around Santa Rita and wrote plays for a lot of them, and she's done not only preaching but counseling. From the faith-based perspective, she teaches Bible study. She has programs. This program, Spirit Alive Network, airs all over the world and meets millions of people every single day. And, you know, she does all of this for no cost. She does it because of her love of God and her love of service for the humanity. So I want to thank her for all that she does and all that you've done to help us advance higher education. So, Bishop Cook, with that, I love you. I love Dr. Palmer, and thank you once again for allowing me to host another wonderful program on your network.
It is always a delight to have you, Dr. Henderson. You are well loved and well respected here at the Spirit Alive Network. To all of you, we want to thank everyone that was here in the studio and our chat rooms. We want to thank you so much for listening. We hope that you were truly enlightened. We pray that you continue to have a beautiful and blessed week, that you acknowledge Christ in all that you do, and from our household to yours. It is our fervent prayer that you be ye transformed. Good night, and God bless you from all of us here at the Spirit Alive Network. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Bishop Cook. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye now.